Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Nessie's Dead. We are your hosts, Spencer and Helen.
Hello.
Hello. Now, I've been trying to guess all day. I've been racking my mind trying to think what you're covering because you gave me a hint or two,
I did.
and I thought I was like on it. I was like, oh, I got it. I
No,
figured it out. And everything, you're like, no, you're not even close.
no,
So
you're not.
I'm ready for you to tell me what this is.
Yeah, so when I started looking into this case, I really fell down quite the rabbit hole. A lot of cases that we do cover true crime on this podcast, there always seems to be some kind of police corruption, or sometimes it's just, sloppy police work. And we're always like, why? And it's so aggravating. So this case really got me thinking, and there were a lot of things that came up behind the scene that really were answering those questions of why, and why would this be allowed to happen, and also how does this happen. And so as I was plunging into this and going through all this, it really was kind of like a pull back the curtain. And it also made me think about a lot of the cases that we do talk about, and we're so puzzled by the why. So are you ready to plunge?
I am.
Okay, so what we're going to plunge into, it is going to seem very true crime. It is a case of two boys that were hit by a train.
Oh my God, I know this case.
Do you? Good. All right. So I don't know. Do you know all the conspiracies and all the things behind it as well?
I think so because
Okay.
this was one of the first true crime cases that I actually was interested in. If it's the one I'm thinking of, I'm not going to get into it, of course, because that is what you're here to do. But I think I know. But you brought up like conspiracy talk with
Yes.
it, and I don't know. Like, for my knowledge of it, I know theories of
Mm-hmm.
what happened and corruption and whatnot, but I do not know if I knew anything in terms of like conspiracy talk,
Okay. So,
if that makes sense. Maybe I'm
yes.
just looking at it from a different perspective, though.
At first, with the research, I didn't get too much of that. And then once I stumbled into it, it just snowballed. So it does appear to be way more than it is on the surface, from police corruption to drug smugglers, government conspiracies, and a lot of cover ups. So,
Okay, yeah. See, like I knew about drug stuff, I knew about corruption, but not government.
yes, so we'll
So
get
I'm
into
very
all that.
intrigued.
And when we do get into the government stuff, a lot of this I did have to dilute, or this would be a 2-3 parter. There is a lot more you can dive into. So feel free, if this interests you, to do your own research, and you could probably really get the full scope of what's going on. But like I
Yeah, get
said,
to doing your own research, everyone.
yes. So like I said, today we will be doing the case of the boys on the track. And we're just going to kind of pull back that curtain to see who is actually pulling the strings on. To me, this is one of the biggest cover-ups I have come across. I know there's probably more. It's probably not the biggest one, but just seeing what we don't know and why things are being covered up by officials was really eye-opening. So let's take the plunge.
Yes, I'm excited to hear what you have.
All right. So on August 23rd, 1987, 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives ventured out into the night town of Alexander, Arkansas. Now, the two boys were going to go spotlight hunting. For anybody that's not familiar with that is, it is typically an illegal form of hunting in Arkansas, but something the locals participate in, where one person has a flashlight and they will flash it into the night, and when the animal is stunned, the other person will shoot it, which, I mean, you can kind of see why that's illegal. But again, it was a popular activity for locals to do. However,
And this is
unfortunately,
very small town, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Now, however, this is not going to end very well. It does turn into tragedy, as at about 4:25 a.m., the crew of a 75-car, 6,000-ton Union Pacific freight train, more than a mile long and traveling at more than 50 miles per hour, spot the two boys lying motionless on the tracks, about 300 feet ahead of them. The members of the locomotive crew state that their bodies were partially covered by a green tarp. The boys were lying beside each other with their arms to their side, the boys did not move despite the sound of the approaching train, including, of course, the brakes, the air horn. And when a train is coming at you that fast, the tracks are really going to be shaking. The boys were then dragged by the train for over half a mile.
Hmm.
Once the train came to a stop, the crew noted that the bodies did not display what had occurred if the boys were actually hit by a train, as the blood at the scene did not appear to be red. And well, blood is usually kind of thin when it's been pumping with oxygen to the body, but instead it
Like
appeared,
fresh blood. Or
yeah,
like, yeah.
instead it appeared as if the boys had already been dead. The blood was thick and more of a purple color.
Ew.
Um, and also there was a lack of blood on the rails. And unfortunately, to kind of put this in perspective, when a body is hit with a train at this speed, it's kind of like throwing a water balloon at a wall. Like, it's not
Oh
going
my
to
God.
be pretty. But they did notice there was a lack of blood. Now, the train crew reported the incident to law enforcement at about 4:40 a.m. Police arrive on the scene. At the scene, the police report finding the gun and the flashlight, but the tarp the crew had seen was not recovered from the scene, and the police disputed the existence of any tarp.
Yeah, I remember the tarp is like a huge center point.
Yeah.
But they do find everything else that like the gun, the hunting gun and all the other stuff was normal, right?
Yes. And a number of witnesses had reported seeing this tarp covering the boys from their waist to their knees. And police still, they were like, there's no tarp being present. Even the conductor pointed out that where the tarp had landed when they hit. And a lot of railroad workers believe that paramedics had actually picked up this tarp and kind of like taken it away with them, which is odd. The police also noted that they found 19 grams of cannabis on Kevin, but the police did not do a good job at this crime scene in general. They really rushed to clean this up, not taking proper time to collect evidence. The crime scene was not taped off, and they actually left one of the boys' feet behind at the scene for 2 days out in plain sight.
What?
Yeah, they didn't even collect all the body parts.
Why or how? Like,
Just sloppy. They went in there, they were rushing, they were throwing things in evidence bags. They even let the next train just come through. Yeah. So,
that literally would destroy evidence.
mhm.
And leaving body parts out in the elements so that animals and insects and nature can have its way
Yeah.
also changes the evidence.
And imagine if that was your kids and their foot is just out there. And I do believe it was one of the family members. I'm not completely sure, that went out there a couple days later and saw that that was still there. Of course, the next day, when the boys had not returned home, word quickly spread of their disappearance, and it wasn't long before police arrived to their homes and informed the parents that they had been hit by a train the evening before, and the police reported that these boys had been killed by that train. Now, on February 16th, 1988, the first responders at Saline Memorial Hospital staff gave their reports of the scene, and official hospital reports indicate notes from paramedics stating, like we said, the blood from the bodies and body parts were dark in color in nature, which would indicate lack of oxygen, and pose the question, of course, how long the victims were dead. Staff also noted that there was an absence of fresh blood, just like the conductors did, and this, of course, was not similar to trauma sites that they had seen in the past. About a week after the boys were identified by their dental records and a funeral was held for the two, the state then sent in a high-profile medical examiner. Tests were soon taken from the accident by medical examiner Fahmy Malik. Now, Dr. Malik did his autopsy and he ruled the deaths as the result of marijuana intoxication, saying that the boys had smoked the equivalents to 20 joints apiece.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That detail is like a huge part of that case
Yeah.
because it's not true,
Mm-mm. It's
nor
ridiculous.
not possible.
Yeah.
Because I remember learning about this case actually from Mile Higher podcast,
Yeah.
and they enjoy their pot.
Mm-hmm.
And when they talked about it, they really like go into
They
detail
do.
explaining it and why that can't be the case. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, interesting. Because I don't know. But I mean, that sounds crazy too.
Yeah, they do a
Like,
really good
that
job.
sounds my higher.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with THC and its effects, definitely check out what they have to say about it because it'll put this into a lot better perspective. But yeah, Malik decided to rule this as the psychedelic effects of THC
Ugh.
and that the train had passed over them, causing an accidental death. He also did not mention the lack of blood at the crime scene or the color of the blood that was found. It was later found that the correct blood test wasn't even done on the boys. The medical examiner had actually used a urine test to test the boys' blood.
How do they get their urine?
No, he used a urine test to test the boys' blood. Yeah, so he didn't
What?
even use the right type of test for this.
I,
Oh,
I don't
wait.
even, I can't even grasp that.
No. So, side note here, Dr. Malik had inconsistent findings in the past on exams he performed. Police investigators and the county coroner stated that there had been several cases where their medical findings contradicted with medical examiner Dr. In one case, a man found with 5 gunshots to the chest was ruled a suicide. This one really gets me here. So later on, he conducted another autopsy of a man who was found dead in his home, decapitated, and the head of this man, James, was missing. Dr. Malik said that the cause of death was a stomach ulcer. And when asked about the missing head, he claimed that the man's dog had eaten it, although it was very evident that the man's head had been severed with a knife. The head was later found in a dumpster, and Malik claimed that he guessed the dog must have vomited it up. And he claimed that he had tested the dog's vomit and found traces of human brain and skull. None of that makes absolutely any sense.
No, I don't think we even need to call him Dr. Malik. I
No,
think it's just Malik.
Malik.
And first of all, a dog is not going to eat your entire head.
No,
I mean, they couldn't. I mean theoretically, but it's not a wolf.
no,
And the whole head just clean, bone and all.
no.
And you can tell the difference between a decapitation and an animal bite.
Yeah, and where was the skull? And like, there would be leftover, not just a completely
Yeah.
missing head,
So the
but
dog threw up an
the full
intact
head.
head,
Yeah, in the
and
dumpster.
the dog then was like, time to take out the trash and puts it in a dumpster.
Yeah, a smart dog.
I know, a unique, very unique dog.
Mm-hmm.
Very talented dog.
Very. Now,
Very untalented, uneducated Mr. Malik.
yes, very much so. But this was the high profile medical examiner. As for the police, Rick Elmenberg, the chief police officer of Saline County, stated that they had not ruled out anything except for foul play, explaining that this was not a murder. The parents, however, were not accepting this finding, and of course not. They decided to conduct their own investigation.
Good
Now,
for them.
I know. I mean, if somebody said my kid had smoked 20 joints and fell asleep on a train track, I would be like, are you kidding me? I would get a second opinion as well. Just a side note this here, and I think this will come into play a little bit more later on. It's going to kind of tie into things and really show some things that are going on here. So it really made it difficult for the parents to battle the coroner due to his relationship with, at the time, Governor Bill Clinton. And Clinton was a big supporter of him. Both
Oh,
Clinton and the Arkansas State Medical Examiner Commission Chair Jocelyn Elders, who had power to give and remove him from office, instead gave him a raise. Clinton excused his behavior as being overworked and underpaid.
so
So,
you misinterpret a dog eating a head
mhm,
and marijuana poisoning and using a urine sampling test kit for blood
yeah.
in your own profession. And
Mm.
Clinton's from Arkansas.
Yeah, he was the governor
Okay.
at the time, yeah. And so it's
Okay,
very
okay.
clear here that the two had something going on, or the doctor had something that he was holding over Clinton, because why would Clinton go
Oh,
out of his way?
well, especially considering the Clintons, that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot. We could do a whole episode on
Yeah, we
that
could.
conspiracy.
We definitely could. Now, the parents, however, of course, like I said, they're not accepting the original medical examiner's findings, and they did decide to hire a second opinion and a third opinion. And
Oh,
after 13 long months, the boys' parents were able to prove that they knew all along that the boys had been murdered. A second autopsy was conducted on March 1988 by James Burton of San Antonio, and he was very skeptical about the findings of marijuana. After conducting his own autopsy, he found that the boys had smoked maybe what had equated to 2 joints in their system, not 20, which makes more sense. They're
yeah,
teenagers, or they're not walking around with pounds of marijuana in their pockets. Like, are you
right.
kidding me?
Well, 2 joints each?
Yes, which
Okay.
makes about sense for the night. He concluded
Yeah.
that the doctor had just made up the findings of the 20. Despite the damage from the train, the boys' heads and torsos remained intact.
Oh, wow.
Because of this, they found that Don Henry's shirt contained evidence of a stab wound to the back,
Mm,
and that Kevin's skull may have been crushed by his own rifle. Also, 6 of James' peers also agreed with his findings, and on September 1988, a grand jury finally ruled the boys' deaths to definitive homicide.
there we go.
Yep, and now this would also lead to a 35 years of cover-ups and conspiracy. Now,
Now, wasn't this okay? So it's a small railroad town
yes.
in Arkansas in the 80s. Now, I'm assuming very conservative.
Hmm.
And that wasn't that kind of part of it. Like the whole community was like, oh my God, the marijuana, it's the marijuana.
No, they weren't. The whole community, and
Really?
we'll get into that, was outraged by this.
Okay. Well, good, good. They
Yeah,
weren't
so
brainwashed.
at this time, tensions were high in Arkansas, and people believed that this case was homicide and that the police weren't telling the truth, and that this seemed to be an obvious cover up that was taking place. The doctor, of course, he went under scrutiny as his autopsy was found ridiculous. He had also butchered the autopsy literally by sawing up and destroying what remained of the boys, especially Kevin's skull. As it was sawed in so many different ways, it was difficult to read the skull fractures that they found. Burton said that he had performed thousands of autopsies and had never seen anything like this. And this made it impossible to put any more clues together. There could have been more evidence and injuries to the bodies, but because of the original state-appointed medical examiner, there was no way to determine how much more evidence there was. In addition to Burton, 2 other pathologists and a team of 7 with more than a combined 100 years accumulated experience in investigating homicides reviewed the case, and they agreed of the charges and the ruling of death to murder. The doctor, however, dismissed any wrongdoing and stuck by his claims and findings and said they were correct. When presented with the evidence of the stab wounds, he simply answered, "There were no stab wounds and the boys were alive before the train hit them," and stated, "Don't worry about it and reflect on the train instead."
He couldn't even give reason as to why the other coroner thought he saw stab wounds. Like,
Hmm.
he could have been like, no, you didn't see stab wounds. Maybe you confused it with ABC.
No.
He was just like, no, look at the train.
Yeah, he was just really deflecting things onto the train. And then at one point, he said that the scrutiny was because people were racist because he was Egyptian, and that's why. So he was really like, I'm correct, everybody else is wrong. Even though that team has over 100 years accumulated experience in this, it didn't seem to sway that he could have been wrong.
Mm,
Now, the parents at this time wanted answers, and Linda Ives, she was out for blood. And she was running smear campaigns against the local sheriff, stating that he had been operating a massive cover-up.
Oh, good for her.
Yes.
Now, that's Kevin's mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, at this time, defense attorney Dan Harmon approached the Ives family with his friend, Deputy Prosecutor Richard Garrett, and convinced them that he and Garrett would stop at nothing to find those responsible for their son's murder. And we are going to talk a lot about Dan Harmon in this.
Was
And
he genuine?
no,
Okay.
not at all.
He kind of like tricks her, right?
Oh, there's a lot of trickery when it comes to Dan Harmon, and we're going to cover it all. So at this point, the grand jury is then called in to investigate the case. But also, as we get into this, you'll realize that the grand jury isn't looking for the best interest either. And this is when the case really starts to take an odd turn. So the investigation then begins. Saline County Sheriff James Steed invested $8,000 out of $16,000 of Office Drug Enforcement funds that went towards the Saline County grand jury investigation, which, keep this in your back pocket, is very strange. Why would you use drug enforcement money for a murder investigation?
Well, they're saying it's drug related.
But still, I think it'll make more sense as we dive into this, what was actually going on. So witnesses start coming forward with information about the night the boys were killed. And we have several here, but unfortunately for these witnesses, it would seem that they are going to pay the ultimate price for coming forward. The information I am about to share about the witnesses of what they said, however, did not become public knowledge until many years later. But I'm going to share what I know about what they were going to say. First, we have Keith McCassell, who was an informant for Dan Harmon, and he had actually taken aerial photographs of the crime scene. He also claimed he was there the night the boys were murdered. After he told police what he had witnessed, he stated afterwards that he had told the wrong people, referring to those in charge of the case. He then began to give away his personal items to family members, say his goodbyes, and even planned out his own funeral. And on November of 1988, he was found murdered in the carport of his home, stabbed to death with 113 stab wounds and covered with a curtain.
What?
Mm-hmm. It was determined that robbery was not a motive. He was also murdered 2 days after Sheriff Steed lost re-election. Again, keep that in your back pocket. And McCassell's neighbor, who was a shut-in, stated that he saw 5 men wearing black masks step into the garage and murder him. The same neighbor was then charged with his death, and police believed that the murder was unrelated to the boys' case. Next, we have Keith Coney. He was scheduled to testify before the grand jury in the case. He had actually seen the victims the night they were killed. Keith had told his dad and other family members that 2 police officers had killed Kevin and Dawn before they were placed on the train tracks. He claimed that he saw this himself and that the police were the ones who had done this. 2 days after telling friends and family he was murdered, his throat was slashed, and he attempted to flee from his attackers on a motorcycle. Witnesses say that they saw somebody run him off the road and he lost control and died. His death was ruled as a motorcycle accident in January of 1989.
With a throat slash.
Yeah, so the throat slash wasn't found until afterwards. I believe it was in the autopsy. But yeah, so the way you would put it together, though, it didn't happen after, of course. He was run off the road in front of witnesses. It would have happened before. Then we have Greg Collins, who was called to testify before the grand jury and was an acquaintance of Keith. He failed to appear after getting a subpoena from the grand jury. He was killed by 3 shots from a shotgun on January 26, 1989, making him, of course, unable to testify. Then we have Daniel Booney Bearden, was another witness who disappeared without a trace in March of 1989, and to this day, he's never been found. An article of clothing was found in the area where an anonymous caller claims he was murdered. The caller in question has never been tracked down. Booney was also friends to the last 2 victims that were found murdered, Greg and Keith. Then we have Jeff Rhodes.
More?
Yeah, we have more. In 1989, was found in a burning dumpster with a shotgun blast to the head. He was abducted, shot in the head, and set on fire in the dumpster.
What?
Yes. Then we have Richard Winters, who was also supposed to appear as a witness before the grand jury. He was gunned down in a robbery that turned out to be staged. Then we have Jordan Kettison. In June of 1990, was found in his vehicle dead from a shotgun blast to the head. He also claimed to have information about the murders of the boys on the track and the murders of Keith McCassell, the first person who was found dead. Before he was able to testify his information, he was killed. His body was cremated before the autopsy could take place. Then we have... Yeah.
It just keeps going.
It does. Then we have Mike Samples, who was also shot to death in June of 1999. It was believed that Mike had participated in retrieving drugs that were dropped in the airplanes in the area, which we'll go to in a little bit more detail here. So he had some different information that he was wanting to share there. All these deaths were classified as murder cases, which of course it's very clear they are. But no arrests were ever made, and they all remain unsolved to this day.
Okay.
Now,
how many is that?
There were 8. Now, after the first witnesses, Keith Coney and Keith McCassell, were found dead, the case was shut down. Once the case was dropped on December 31st, 1988, the grand jury was not allowed to disclose any evidence that was found during the investigation and that was brought up to them over the court procedures. Now, Dan Harmon and the judge, John Cole, ruled the evidence as not very strong for the case. And the men and the women of the jury were just sent home, unable to do anything with the evidence they were presented. And of course, they weren't very happy about this at all. So now we're going to jump into the theory. This is the big theory. It's the usual theory that's been given about the boy's death and the involvement in drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to do so, we will need to visit an airport, but it's not just going to be any airport, and we will explain why. This is the Municipal Mena Airport, and as we dive into this, we're going to cover a lot more than just county police cover-up, but we're going to plunge into an array of drug conspiracies, CIA, and government involvements, including 3 former presidents, and a $3 to $5 billion worth of drugs that had been flown into this airport in Arkansas.
Whoa.
So first off, to step into this is Jean Duffy. This is 2.5 years after the murders. She was assigned to lead a drug task force to investigate drug smuggling. According to ID files, the day Duffy was hired, her boss, Gary Arnold, instructed her not to investigate any public officials. Almost immediately, this is what she's told. However, Duffy's undercover officers discovered that there were a number of public officials involved in drug trafficking. She was afraid to go against Arnold's orders because she's thinking he might be one of the public officials involved in these drugs. So Duffy then goes and brings this information to Assistant U.S. Attorney Bob Govar, who was in charge of federal investigations of the corruption that was going on in Saline County, as she knew there had been federal investigations taking place for the last 9 months. So she felt like, I can trust this guy. He's looking into this as well. A task force obtained information that tied public officials, including Richard Garrett and Dan Harmon, to drugs and the murders of Kevin Ives and Don Henry. This is when Linda Ives realized that Harmon and Garrett had been lying to her and using her for over 4 years. And This is heartbreaking, I can imagine, to realize that they're not trying to solve her son's murder.
Yeah, instead to keep her away from figuring it out.
Exactly. Now, in fear for his reputation, Harmon, who had friends in the Arkansas press, used the local papers to destroy Jean Duffy's character. By launching a smear campaign, there was over 200 articles crucifying her reputation, and not one of these things were any of truth to it. Duffy's boss, U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks, concluded that the media whirlwind created by Harmon had just made her ineffective, and they fired her.
What?
Yeah. Of course, that was exactly the reaction as well, because 5 task force members resigned in protest of her being fired. Now,
Well, good for them.
yeah, they were like, no, this is bullcrap. Although she was no longer head of the task force, Duffy and another officer of the task force dug deeper into the train death case and eventually brought information to U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks. And Chuck Banks, he promised that they would be able to use this and testify with the information. However, of course, this never happened, and the federal investigation regarding corruption in Saline County was unexpectedly terminated. All public officials who had indictments against them were cleared of all wrongdoings. Duffy says to the Wall Street Journal in 1997, "I finally understood. To solve the train deaths case, this would be to expose the crimes of Mina, and no government agent who has come close to doing either has survived professionally."
Wow. And she still is saying that publicly.
Yes.
Because
Now,
that's scary to say. I feel like that puts a target on her.
well, she did go into hiding, and we'll get here in a second.
Oh,
So
wow.
now, Jean, at this point, with her job gone, was still considered a threat to Dan Harmon because, of course, she knew too much. After taking office as district prosecutor now, Dan Harmon called for a grand jury to investigate Jean. However, the jury quickly realized that Harmon's accusations were false and refused to indict her. His next step was to issue a subpoena against Jean to force her to hand over all evidence that she had recovered about him and other corrupt Arkansas officials. But,
Doesn't that look bad on his part?
I mean, he's got a lot of protection, and you'll see that it doesn't seem like anything can harm Dan Harmon. Yeah. So she's given the subpoena against her, and Jean refuses to answer to this subpoena. She knew that turning this information over, that the lives of the witnesses and informants would then be put in jeopardy. As we just saw, like 8 people died that came forward earlier.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of evident there.
I love Jean.
I know. She came in there and was like, I do. We don't get a whole lot of Jean Duffys, which I wish we did have more.
Yeah. Maybe we have more. They just, quote, commit suicide.
Yep, that's exactly what happens. During this time when all this is going on with Jean, somebody had overheard some information that was being said. They called Jean's mother and warned her that if she was arrested for refusing to answer the subpoena, that this informant had heard that Jean would be killed in jail. So this is where Jean does go into hiding. And she's waiting on indictments from the federal jury because she's turned in this information. She felt like she knew once Dan and the others were charged, she would be freed. So she's just kind of waiting in limbo. I mean, at this time, her family was getting threats. There was a lot going on. She was very fearful and scared for her family and, of course, herself. But then Chuck Banks announced that all public officials, including Dan, were relieved of jurisdiction and all drug charges and wrongdoings. Everything was dropped.
Okay.
Now, this did stun the public. And there was a lot of confusion on what could make Don and Kevin's death so important. Like, what about this? Why is there such a cover-up?
Yeah, it's confusing. I mean, it's like these 2 teenagers die, obviously murdered, but nobody wants to address nobody on the case wants to address the fact that it was a murder.
Exactly.
And they're going to extreme lengths to cover stuff up. I mean, killing at least 8 people. And
Yeah.
it's like, it is kind of weird. It's like, well, what on earth happened?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with the case, so it's like, oh, well, I mean, not that I agree or understand it because it's all crazy.
Yeah.
But I actually don't remember too much of like anything from this point.
Oh, I'm going to refresh you.
Yeah. I mean, you've already told me a lot of new stuff, but I'm sure it's only going to get crazier now.
It does. Now, 5 years after the boy's death, we have John Brown. He was then appointed as the Saline County criminal investigator. On his first day on the job, he was taken for an hour-long drive and told that he was not allowed to look into the case of the boys on the track.
And that's so suspicious. Like,
Yeah,
they're not even like pretending they didn't do anything.
yeah. He
They're
was,
just like, don't tell on me. Like, that's what it is.
yeah, and he was threatened to leave this alone. But like Gene, he ignored this and went through the case files, where he found everything to be missing. No crime scene photos, no list of evidence. All the things that should be in a file were
Yeah.
missing. He did, however, go forward and begin tracking down the evidence. At this point, he runs into a woman named Charlene Wilson, and he interviewed her in jail. And after her shocking story, Harmon goes ballistic and starts making calls and threats to those involved in the reinvestigation of the case. Charlene, who had been a witness to the drug allegations against Harmon, and Roger Clinton, who was also Bill Clinton's brother.
Mm.
Charlene was in jail with a ridiculous 30-year sentence given to her by none other than Dan Harmon. During the arrest, he told her that if you ever brought up things that I had done, I told you that I would take you down. And that's what he did. For the crimes she committed, the normal sentence would have been probation. This was the first time she had ever been arrested for drugs that were allegedly found in her home.
Was it marijuana?
I didn't specifically see what type of drugs. From what I'm guessing, it was probably cocaine because it seems to be where this is going. But yeah, 30 years for something that a normal person would have gotten probation. It's your first time. Move along. Don't do it again. So at this time, the entire criminal system of Saline County is corrupt and webbed into this drug trade in the state of Arkansas. And this is what John Brown is starting to find, especially after he interviews her. And what she told John Brown during this interview, well, Charlene had been with Dan Harmon at the tracks the night Kevin and Dawn were murdered. And there were other witnesses to confirm this as well. She states that the boys had witnessed the drop site and they were curious to what was being dropped there. And that's her statement. And I mean, that seems very plausible to why Dan wants her locked away and shut up.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't kill her.
I am surprised too that they just locked her up for 30 years.
Because she can still talk in jail.
Oh, and she is.
Yeah.
With all this, it's kind of clear of what's going on with the drug trafficking in Arkansas. Drug trafficking happens all over, so it kind of makes you wonder, why is this such a huge deal? Well, in 1982, Barry Seal had moved his multi-million-dollar cocaine smuggling from Louisiana to Arkansas. Now, Barry Seal, he has a movie about him. I think Tom Cruise plays him in this movie.
I hate Tom Cruise.
I know, me too. But he was a very high-profile person during this time period, and he was known for cocaine and drug smuggling. He was allowed to do so, and he continued activities with the government allowing him to do so without interference.
Yes, the CIA has allowed a whole lot of drug smuggling. Like, they're like the ones who introduced coke and what is LSD to the system. And it's like, no one knows. Like, that's not even like conspiracy talk. Like, that can all be backed up with a lot.
Yeah.
Like, that's like proven. Like, they did that.
Yeah, we're going to cover that too. So if you do think it's a conspiracy, we're going to dive into that.
Good.
There's actually over a 20,000 page of documents that were accumulated about this drug trafficking.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not a conspiracy. It was real. And this was the one used for the aircrafts that Barry Seal had at the Mena airport. It was to smuggle cocaine. I mean, his airplanes had special cargo doors installed that could be opened during mid-flight to make these drops. And so this is where things get a lot more complicated and a little more eye-opening. So as we dive into a bit more ongoings that were taking place at the airport, I'm just going to clarify here that the Mena airport is a private airport. So it does not have scheduled commercial air services. This airport beforehand was known worldwide is where illegal drugs and weapons were transported during the Iran affairs. So it's already famous for millions of pounds of drugs and thousands of dollars of weapons being flown in and imported to America. So it already has history here.
Yeah, a similar history.
Yes. Now, in 1982, the police in the town of Mina learned that there was this trafficking going on that we've been talking about, and that this was operating out of this airport. They actually reached out to the Arkansas State Police and others, but even reporting this to the federal government, they refused to stop the smuggling and didn't act upon any of these complaints. So the townspeople are kind of like, this is going on and we know it's going on. But the federal government's like not doing anything. Now, during the 1980s, a large drug, weapon, and money laundering smuggling operation was being run by Barry Seal, and the airport was his base. The Arkansas State Police began to believe that every time Barry Seal flew a load of drugs into the U.S. government, he also flew in 2 loads for himself to be dropped off. So where would all these drugs go?
His house?
Well, we'll let you put the pieces together here. Now,
Did I put the pieces together?
no, not yet.
Oh.
Now, other allegations on this airport are that the CIA used this airport as a base of operations to train pilots and troops for the intervention in Nicaragua uprising in the 1980s. So these were secret trainings. So this airport is now being used for drug smuggling, secret soldier trainings by the CIA for conflicts that we don't even belong in, which of course is why it's secret. And like I said before, the estimated $3 to $5 billion worth of drugs that were smuggled into this airport. As mentioned during this time, Barry was working closely with the CIA and DEA. This was done to expose the Nicaragua regime as a major supplier of cocaine from Colombia, all of which Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton had all faced scrutiny for. So these illegal actions were taking place here. And there's a lot more information that you can dive into when it goes into these 3 presidents and what they were doing. I did not get into every single piece of the puzzle. Again, we're kind of going to go through this fast and cover the big portions. But again, if you want to look into this individually, these are kind of going to be the things to Google here. All allegations and criminal crimes against Barry Seal and those involved in these activities, of course, they were dropped. And the reason that was given was that it was due to national security risks. Yeah.
What?
So George H.W. Bush did not try to prosecute anyone involved, and neither did any officials in the public justice system. So it seemed no one went down for any of this. At the time, the presidents, they were enforcing their war on drugs and incriminating nonviolent violators while they themselves were the ones that were smuggling the drugs into the U.S.
Have we ever had a decent president?
No. And I mean, a lot of people love Reagan, and he was literally the person that was like, war on drugs, and here he is involved with why we're getting drugs in the United States to begin with.
Yeah, he was the war.
Yeah. I feel like the war on drugs was, again, one of those things where it's like, everybody look over here. Don't look over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what, I mean, I think that's what government officials do best, is distract. Yeah. And they get people going and then distract.
Yeah. And there's always some kind of hint of truth to what they're putting out there. Like, don't look at the drugs. War on drugs. Meanwhile,
drugs.
Now, in 1994, Bill Clinton, at this time, of course, he is the governor of Arkansas, and he was asked at a press conference about Mina, and he claimed he wasn't told anything. And it's not up to him, but the federal government, and that he had nothing to do with it. He knew nothing of the $1 million worth of drugs that the U.S. government was having smuggled in. So he's up there saying, I have no idea. That's federal. I'm the governor. I don't know. In 1988, the prosecuting attorney for the District of Mina Airport held a press statement stating that the Mina Airport had been ignored due to the connection of the criminal activities and with Ronald Reagan and the private drug wars that he was conducting. Reagan, like I said, was also involved in the smuggling of drugs. There was also information that involved the CIA's involvement with the airport, claiming that they conducted a 2-week-long joint training operation with other federal agencies at Menina Airport. And there is so much more. So if you're really wanting to dive into this, definitely just start going down the rabbit hole with Menina Airport. We also have Terry Red, former CIA operator, and L.D. Brown. Now, L.D. Brown was rejected by the CIA. He'd actually wanted to work for them, and he was actually Bill Clinton's bodyguard as well. He said,
Oh.
yes. So he went public during that time. He was being considered for employment with the CIA. Maybe he had some vendetta against them because he didn't get the job. I don't know. But he said he had flown out twice, where he had been given witness to Nicaragua rebels being given M16 rifles in exchange for cocaine. That was then flown back to the Menina Airport. Now the U.S. is going in and they are giving these rebels M16 rifles in exchange for cocaine.
Okay.
He said that once he did see this, he went to Governor Bill Clinton and told him what he had seen. But according to L.D. Brown, Clinton wasn't surprised, even though Clinton was sitting there saying, I know nothing. So he thinks he's going and like making this big news, like Clinton, like this is happening. And Clinton was kind of like, oh, yeah, well, not surprised.
Yeah, because he's doing it.
Yeah, he knows where the cocaine he's doing is coming from, allegedly. Now, the Sheriff's Department, FBI, and CIA all knew that Barry, which was doing these things, and that he was smuggling in, he was changing federal ID numbers on planes, he was, putting unrecord cash into bank accounts. It was no secret here. So indictments were made in 1984, and Barry Seal, after he was freed on bond, he flew straight to Washington, D.C., where he set up meetings with officials and agreed to become an informant and collect evidence against the drug cartel. The DEA also did not notify law enforcement in Arkansas. So again, they weren't notified, which makes me think even more that they know because they're getting these drugs. It seems very, yeah. So they didn't know that Barry was an informant. And Barry, of course, was still able to smuggle drugs. And this was in order to keep his cover up, because you can't have the cartel all of a sudden. He's not smuggling drugs, but he's coming to get information, would be very obvious. There is a lot more to that story as well. But everything that went down between the American government and Barry Seal, I think it's pretty obvious how this is connecting to the boys on the tracks. Now, Barry was indicted again, and he was scheduled to testify. He was able to work out an agreement to stay out of prison and testify against the cartel. These included two very large cartel leaders that were bringing millions of dollars of cocaine into the United States through this airport. And while Barry was working for the CIA, state and federal officers working in Arkansas were still completely blocked from investigating him. Barry was convicted, of course, finally, by the state of Florida. I'm not quite sure what for. Again, I didn't go into too many details with that. He was given probation. During this probation, he was told to check into a certain place at a certain time. So it was a very routine schedule. He was told he could not have any protection, no protective program. And shockingly, he was gunned down.
Shockingly?
Yeah. Well, I say that sarcastically.
Oh. I was like, I don't know.
He's dealing with the cartel, the government here. He's been indicted. He's on probation. Oops, we don't need him anymore. Now, after this, other witnesses were barred and the case was shut down. The drug smuggling activities after Barry's death do continue, and 9 separate states and federal investigations into MENA have also been shut down. And I know that was a lot to unpack, but now we're getting more.
Just a tiny bit of information there.
It was a tiny bit, considering how deep you can go down that rabbit hole. There's a lot more, but now at least we do have an idea of what's going on behind the local officials' backs. And now we're going to go back to the case and look at it from local investigations and see what they were looking into. So we've got an idea now of this area, what was actually taking place. We're going to reel it back a little bit. So there were also, just to notate this, there were also pilots that were involved in this smuggling and trafficking that stated that the area the boys had been was indeed one of the drug smuggling drop areas. And then there were 4 more pilots that came forward with the same information. So now we do have another eyewitness that emerges who had seen Kevin and Dawn with Harmon at the tracks the night of the murder. They stated that they saw Dan Harmon and a few others that night, that they saw them speaking for about 20 minutes before Kevin and Dawn began to approach them on the tracks, and the witness said that the boys stopped and hesitated. And that's all I have from that witness. After this, the FBI offered to place this witness in protective custody and instructed John to turn over all of his information, promising to solve this case. So now John Brown is now being told, same thing as Gene, we need all of your information. So what John Brown and Gene found during their time of investigation was, of course, the drug trafficking that not only involved local officials, but political officials from the state capital as well. That involved cover-ups and cover-ups of deaths.
Cover-ups and cover-ups.
Yes. So we've got the cover-up for the boys on the track, and then we've got them covering up all these witnesses that are dying. It's a lot of cover-ups.
Yeah. But are there cover-ups?
They're cover-ups. 4 years after Jean had found this information, John discovered pretty much the same identical information that she had when investigating the deaths of these boys. Governor Clinton at the time shared an office with state drug czar Robert Shepard, who had been a former sheriff for Dan Harmon's district and had been appointed by Clinton to lead Arkansas's war on drugs.
Okay.
Yep.
He's another bad guy?
Yes. On at least 3 occasions, Robert Shepard attempted to suppress the boys' murder investigations. And in 1990, he met with U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks to persuade him that Jean Duffy, she should be ignored. And in 1993, he told John Brown that his career would be better off if he didn't concentrate his efforts on the boys. In 1995, FBI agent Phyllis reported that Shepard had attempted to interfere with the ongoing investigation, so he just continues with this. The information, it seems pretty obvious who killed these boys and why. They stumbled upon a large shipment of drugs that had been dropped.
Yeah.
And this keeps being suppressed, even though it's very clear with the continuous media and press information keeping this case alive at the time. And the political connection just continued to keep this case dead and to come to a halt. 8 years after these murders, it seems that the pieces to the puzzle do show that there was indeed a murder and a cover-up. And as obvious as this is, it's so shocking to me that nobody's being charged for anything. Like, nothing's happening. Throughout his career, Dan Harmon has been protected by affiliates in Arkansas. In 1990, however, he was finally arrested for 4 misdemeanor accounts of tax fraud. Now, when he was arrested, there's a couple of things that he had to do while he was in jail, and they would just go ahead and release him on bond. You know how that works.
Yeah.
But he refused to take the drug test. So he just ended up sitting in jail because he refused to do this.
That always looks good.
Yeah, right. He was found guilty and sentenced to 1 year of probation. His license was suspended, but reinstated after a long list of high officials testified on Harmon's behalf.
I am so sick of them. I am sick of that. I'm sick of it back then. I'm sick of it today.
Well, he continues.
This case is very frustrating.
It is, and he continues to be reelected as Saline County prosecutor.
Elected by the public or elected by his buddies?
By his buddies.
Yeah. Throwing the votes.
Now, this gives him control over the drug task force as well.
Convenient.
But now in November of 1995, a package of fake cocaine labeled evidence that belonged to Harmon's drug task force was found in the possession of Harmon's wife, Holly. And the packages had originally contained over $100,000 worth of pure cocaine.
Oh my God. And that's $100,000 that time.
Yes. So 1995 time. Now, a raid was done and conducted by the DEA, and they confiscated drug-related files, and a case against Harmon was finally being built. However, Dan Harmon continues to be protected by prosecution, by the county, state, and federal officials. So everybody is still protecting him.
Yeah.
Now, Judge John Cole presided over a number of Salem County scandals in which he appointed Dan Harmon. He later elevated to chairman of the State Sentencing Commission. Former Saline County Sheriff Jim Steed, after losing re-election because of his participation in the train death cover-ups, he was still provided with a state job inspecting prisons, so they still took care of him. Steed's head investigator Rick was appointed Benton police chief to keep reports on Harmon's criminal activities from the public. And in 1995, he was appointed chief of Capitol Police. Investigator Don Burnsong was elevated to state police to Governor Clinton's office after following his participation in the train cover-ups. U.S. Attorney Chuck Banks, after clearing Harmon of all wrongdoings, was nominated for a federal judgeship position. Arkansas State Medical Examiner, our favorite doctor here, was finally forced to resign in 1992. However, Clinton immediately created a new job of $70,000 a year for him as State Health Department. So he's
Okay.
at the State Health Department now. Former Arkansas State Health Department Director Jocelyn, which we talked about earlier as well, after years of covering up for this doctor, was appointed Surgeon General of the United States by President Bill Clinton. And as governor, like we said, Clinton sticks by his words to this day that he lacked any authority to do anything about Menina drug smuggling operations. And as president, he still failed to bring those involved to any justice from the Menina drug smuggling operations.
Presidents, they're in it to just play and get away with things.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always. I really believe that.
Yeah, it just really pisses me off to go through all those people that we have talked about and hear how much they have succeeded in life and how many
For a while.
promotions they got all the way up to the state capitol.
It's, yeah. I don't even, yeah.
There are no words. Now, finally, in 1995, the FBI announces to Linda that in light of the fact that there's no evidence, it's time for you to consider the fact that a crime has not been committed, end quote. This case, after 35 years, over 35 years now, is still being covered up. And there is still new information coming to light. And for anyone that wants to look into this, there is a website made by Linda called ID Files, which is where some of this information did come from. Now, it has a handful of documentations and details on this case, and it is updated as well. Linda, unfortunately, she did pass away, but there are still people that are carrying on the website in her honor. But to this day, despite the Freedom of Information Act, much of this case is still unknown. And
Like the JFK files.
Yep.
Just like that. And so officially this case, it's still considered death by marijuana?
No, they ruled it as a murder, but it's never been solved.
A cold case.
Yeah. But I mean, it's all the evidence is there. I mean, it's not hard to see that these boys just unfortunately walked up wrong time, wrong place, and were taken out by officials of power who had a lot of people covering their backs, and for a lot of reasons that went way higher past county into federal, CIA, all of that. It's just a lot to know that when we do hear, like I said, when we started this out, when we do wonder why police officers would cover up things or why they investigate things and not do what seems to us clearly the right actions to take.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder how many more cases out there. I'm sure this is just a small drop in the bucket that are leaked to way higher things that are out of our sight.
Well, look at like the smiley face killings and or what's happening in Austin around Lady Bird Lake right now for the past few years. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, police officer after police officer after police officer is ignoring it. And the FBI is like, yeah, there's no concern.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, I've lost count. I don't even know how many bodies have been found in that
Yeah.
lake, none of which are consistent with drowning. Like, none of them drown to death. Literally,
Mm-hmm.
none of them. They all die outside the water and then their bodies are found. And it's like, it can't be this many dumb police officers or FBI agents who just don't know how to do their job. There's got to be more to it, you know?
Yeah, that we
And
had a one survivor from this who
yeah,
literally says he was drugged and somebody tried to kill him.
yeah. And they're like, they're there.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, there are a lot of cases where it's not cover up, it's just terrible
Sloppy.
police
Yeah.
work, like Gainesville Ripper. We always come back to that one.
Yeah.
I know there are more that I just can't think of, but
It makes you wonder.
yeah. It
Mm-hmm.
makes me think, like, if I was murdered, are they going to solve it? Or is there going to be some weird cover up? Or are they going to just not wear gloves and lose everything? It's like, it's just mind boggling, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, it's like if other people did that in their jobs, they'd be fired.
Yeah. And it's like
And they,
we trust these officials. They're supposed to be working for us, not against us. But that's
yeah.
clearly not the case at all.
Yeah.
But that's
Wow.
all I have. I feel like for looking into what I thought was just going to be a true crime case and, of course, some police corruption, it definitely took me down a completely different direction and a rabbit hole of things that make you think. And again, there's a couple of other people you can look into. I would definitely look into ID Files, which Linda created. And there is a petition you can sign. Of course, it's not like the government's going to do anything if there's like 2 million signatures. Like, are they going to open this up? Are they going to let the people know? But every little bit does help just to let them know that, hey, we're on to you. We see what you're doing. Open these files. Let us know. Solve this case. Bring justice to where it's deserved. At the end of the day, we know the chances of that happening probably won't, but
Mm-hmm.
it's always,
Sadly.
sadly, you can't lose hope, though, because if you lose hope, then they will continue to think they can get away with these things and think that the public is just sheep and that we don't pay attention. But
Yep.
it's obvious we're paying attention here.
Yeah. That's why we all need to come together and stop it.
Yeah,
But
it's very hard to do. I feel like
it is.
the government does a lot to pin the people themselves against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes our chances of all coming together not in good odds, for sure.
No.
No.
But what was good was your deep dive and coverage.
Well, thank you. I was worried once I found all of this information about the CIA and everything. I had already done this whole case, and so it was kind of like,
Yeah.
where do I stick this in? Because now that I know it, I can't not share it. I have to
Yeah.
share this somewhere. So, anyways,
Well, all very fascinating. Thank you.
you're welcome. I think this is our first conspiracy like this to do.
Yeah, I actually have one myself coming up.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's one I've been looking at, and I already decided on it, and then I realized, like yesterday or this morning or something, that it goes into a little more of a conspiracy than I expected.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, here we are.
Here we are. That's how this one was. I was like, oh, now we are down a large rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, there's your hint for my next
Oh,
one.
yay. I wonder.
Watch, I'm going to change it, but
Probably.
we'll see.
We'll see. Well, that's all I have for you this evening.
Well, with that, I guess we'll say goodnight.
And pleasant nightmares.
Bye.
Bye.